It wasn't just the fact that she cheated, it was who she cheated with. My best friend. Someone I'd known my entire life, someone I trusted like a brother. The discovery came through a Reddit post of all things. One of those Am I the Asshole threads where someone anonymously posted about betraying their friend and not knowing how to confess. The details lined up a little too well with my life, and as I read through the comments, my gut churned. I just knew. The confrontation was ugly, to say the least. Shouting matches, broken furniture, tears, everything you would expect in a drama. Except this wasn't fiction. It was my life, and it was crumbling to pieces before my very eyes. I was heartbroken, devastated, and honestly, I didn't know how to cope. The first few days were a blur of anger and sadness, the only constant being the ever-growing weight in my chest. My aunt, seeing me in this state, decided that what I needed was a night out. You know the type, distract yourself, have a few drinks, loosen up a little, and try to forget the pain. She and her friend, Lisa, were insistent. I didn't want to go. I wasn't in the mood for forced fun or half-hearted attempts at cheering me up, but my aunt has a way of not taking no for an answer. She showed up at my place, threw my jacket at me, and said, "You're coming whether you like it or not." I should have known better. It was a mistake to go. My heart wasn't ready for any kind of social interaction, let alone a night out drinking with my aunt and her wild friend Lisa, who was notorious for her reckless behavior. But there I was, sitting in the backseat of my aunt's car, as she and Lisa belted out off-key songs to whatever 80s rock station was playing on the radio. The bar was one of those places that tried too hard to look classy but had an undeniable layer of grime under its polished surface. A mix of businessmen, hipsters, and people trying to escape their own lives filled the dimly lit room. We found a table in the back, ordered a round of drinks, and before I knew it, my aunt and Lisa were deep into their second cocktails while I nursed my beer. It was clear from the start that my aunt had no intention of just casually drinking. She was in full party mode and Lisa was right there with her. Shots of tequila appeared on the table, and after some light-hearted coercion, I downed a couple. The alcohol hit fast, faster than I expected. I was a lightweight when it came to hard liquor, and the burn in my throat did little to ease the burn in my chest. That's when things started getting weird. My aunt, who had always been a bit of a free spirit, was different that night. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the atmosphere, but something was off. Lisa, too, had a look in her eye that made me uncomfortable. They kept asking me questions about my breakup, but not in a sympathetic way. It was more prying, almost like they were feeding off my heartbreak. Every time I tried to steer the conversation away, they'd bring it back. "How could she cheat on you?" Lisa asked, her words slurred. "You're such a good guy." I shrugged, staring into my glass. "I don't know." My aunt, now well past tipsy, leaned in closer, her breath reeking of alcohol. "You need to forget about her. Move on. You know what they say, right? Best way to get over someone is to get under someone else." I forced a laugh, hoping to diffuse the awkwardness. "Yeah, I've heard that." Lisa giggled, leaning in from the other side. "We could help you with that, you know. We're here for you." I didn't like the way she said it, the way her hand lingered on my arm. It was supposed to be a joke, right? Just a drunken attempt to cheer me up. But the way they both looked at me said otherwise. My heart pounded in my chest, and not in a good way. It was that feeling of dread, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I tried to change the subject. "So how's work been for you too?" But they weren't interested in small talk. My aunt shifted closer, her leg brushing against mine under the table. "You know we love you, right? You don't have to be alone." The look in her eyes was something I'd never seen before, not from her. It was like I was seeing a different person, someone I didn't recognize. I was trapped, forced into a situation I never imagined I'd be in. The walls of the bar seemed to close in, the noise around me fading into the background as I became hyper-aware of every uncomfortable second passing. At this point, I was too drunk to think straight, but not drunk enough to completely lose control. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt heavy, my body sluggish from the alcohol coursing through my veins. And then it happened. My aunt leaned in, her lips dangerously close to my ear. "Let us take care of you tonight." Lisa was right there, her hand now resting on my thigh. I froze, panic surging through me like a cold wave. This wasn't right. None of this was right. But in my drunken haze, I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. And before I could even process what was happening, I was being led out of the bar, back to my aunt's car, and eventually to her apartment. The whole time, my mind was screaming at me to stop, to say something, to push them away. But the betrayal, the heartbreak, the alcohol had all blurred together, and I was too broken to fight it. What happened that night is something I still struggle to come to terms with. My aunt and her friend took advantage of me in a moment of vulnerability, a moment where I was too weak to resist. It was betrayal on a level I never expected, a twisted, horrifying echo of the betrayal I had already experienced with my ex and best friend. It wasn't just the physical act, it was the emotional manipulation, the way they preyed on my pain, using it for their own sick satisfaction. In the days that followed, I tried to pretend like it didn't happen. I went back to my apartment, locked myself in my room, and avoided their calls. But the guilt, the shame, and the confusion weighed heavily on me. I didn't know who to talk to, didn't know how to process what had been done to me. I was a man, after all. Men don't get taken advantage of, right? That's what society tells us. We're supposed to be strong and control, always wanting it. But that night proved how wrong that notion is. I eventually sought therapy. And it was through those sessions that I began to understand the depth of what had happened. It wasn't my fault. I was forced into a situation I never consented to, manipulated by people I should have been able to trust. My aunt and Lisa crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and it took me a long time to even say those words out loud. If you've ever felt trapped, if you've ever been manipulated by someone you trusted, know that you're not alone. There's help out there. And there's no shame in reaching out for it. What happened to me wasn't my fault. And if something like this has happened to you, it's not your fault either. I haven't spoken to my aunt or Lisa since that night. The betrayal was too deep, too damaging. It was a painful reminder that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most. And while I'm still healing, I know now that I deserve better. We all do. If you like this story, comment your opinion in the comments section. As I moved on from that horrific experience, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. Healing from betrayal, whether it's from a lover, a friend, or even family, is a long, painful process. But it's possible. It's possible to come out on the other side stronger, more aware, and more resilient. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt powerless, where your trust was shattered, remember that you have the strength to overcome it. You don't have to carry the weight of someone else's betrayal forever. Life didn't magically get better after that night. There was no sudden realization that everything was going to be okay, no immediate sense of relief. Instead, it was a slow crawl through the aftermath, picking up the pieces of my shattered sense of self. Every morning I woke up with the same heavy feeling in my chest, the same shame hanging over me. I wanted to pretend it didn't happen, to erase that night from my memory, but it was always there lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow. I found myself questioning everything, my relationships, my boundaries, even my worth. It was like being betrayed all over again, but this time the betrayal wasn't just about love. It was about trust, safety, and the ability to control my own life. The hardest part was the loneliness. You'd think that after experiencing something like that, you'd want to reach out to someone to share the burden, to have someone tell you it wasn't your fault, but I couldn't. How could I? How could I admit that I let my own aunt and her friend take advantage of me? How could I tell anyone that I didn't fight back, that I didn't stop it? The thought of explaining it made my stomach turn. I turned to Reddit ironically, the same place I had discovered my ex's betrayal. I didn't post, at least not at first. I just lurked in the shadows of various subreddits, reading other people's stories of trauma, abuse, and manipulation. It was comforting in a strange way, knowing I wasn't alone. So many people had been through worse, and they survived. Maybe I could survive too. One night, after a few beers and an overwhelming sense of frustration, I finally made a post, anonymously of course. I wrote about what had happened, how I felt trapped, how I didn't know how to process the situation. I laid everything bare, hoping for some kind of understanding from strangers on the internet. And to my surprise, the responses were overwhelmingly supportive. People validated my experience, told me it wasn't my fault, and shared their own stories of betrayal and manipulation. Reading those comments was the first step toward healing. It wasn't much, but it was something. I realized that what I had been through was real, that it mattered, and that I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. People on Reddit, complete strangers, saw my pain and gave me the empathy I couldn't even give myself at the time. Still, talking about it online wasn't the same as dealing with it in real life. I avoided my aunt like the plague. She called and texted a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready to confront her, to face what had happened. Part of me was still in denial. Maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I started throwing myself into work, using it as a distraction. The long hours at the office helped keep my mind off things, but it wasn't enough. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. What if I had said no more forcefully? What if I had just left the bar when I felt things getting weird? What if I had stood up for myself? The what-ifs ate away at me, making it impossible to find any peace. Eventually, I knew I couldn't go on like this. My mental health was spiraling, and I needed help. That's when I finally decided to seek therapy. It wasn't easy. In fact, the first few sessions were hell. I hated talking about what had happened, hated reliving that night, hated the vulnerability that came with opening up to a stranger, but it was necessary. I had to face what had happened head-on if I ever wanted to move past it. In therapy, I learned about boundaries and consent. I learned that what my aunt and Lisa did to me wasn't just weird or inappropriate, it was a violation. They had crossed a line, and it wasn't okay. I also learned about self-compassion, something I desperately needed. I had been so hard on myself, blaming myself for not being stronger, for not stopping it. But my therapist helped me see that I wasn't at fault. I was vulnerable, heartbroken, and drunk. I wasn't in a position to make rational decisions, and they had taken advantage of that. One of the hardest parts of therapy was confronting the idea of forgiveness. My therapist asked if I thought I could ever forgive my aunt. At first, the answer was an immediate no. How could I forgive someone who had done something so unforgivable? But as time went on, I started to realize that forgiveness wasn't about letting her off the hook. It wasn't about pretending that what happened was okay. It was about letting go of the anger and hurt that was eating me alive. Forgiving her didn't mean we'd ever have a relationship again, it just meant I could move on. The road to recovery was long and messy. There were days when I felt like I was making progress and days when it felt like I was right back at square one. But little by little, I started to reclaim my life. I started going out with friends again, finding joy in small things like hiking or playing video games. I started rebuilding my sense of self-worth piece by piece. One day, months after the incident, I ran into my aunt at a family gathering. It was awkward, to say the least. She acted like nothing had happened, like everything was fine between us. I could see the guilt in her eyes, though. She knew. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or disgust. I just felt sad for her, for what had happened, for the relationship we could never have again. I didn't confront her. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I simply walked away. That was my closure, walking away. Knowing I didn't owe her anything, not an explanation, not forgiveness, not my time or energy. I was done carrying the weight of her betrayal. I was free. If you like this story, comment your opinion in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned through all the pain. Betrayal, in whatever form it takes, is devastating. It breaks you down, makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people around you and about yourself. But it can also be a catalyst for growth. It forces you to reevaluate your boundaries, your relationships, and your sense of self-worth. I learned that healing isn't linear. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when it feels like you'll never be okay again. But with time and support, you can find your way back to yourself. You can rebuild your life, piece by piece, stronger than before. If you've been through something similar, know that it's okay to feel lost, to feel angry, to feel sad. Your pain is valid, and you don't have to go through it alone. Whether it's through therapy, talking to friends, or even reaching out to strangers on the internet, there are people who will understand. There are people who will help you find your way through the darkness. I'm still healing, still figuring things out, but I'm not the same person I was that night at the bar. I'm stronger, wiser, and more aware of the importance of protecting myself emotionally and physically. I know now that I deserve better, and I won't settle for anything less. Betrayal changes you. It forces you to confront your deepest fears, your darkest thoughts. But it also gives you a choice, to stay broken or to rise above it. I chose to rise. Months turned into years, but the memory of that night still lingered like a scar that refused to fade. Yet, as time passed, I found ways to cope, to move forward, and to build a life that wasn't defined by betrayal. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about learning to live with what happened and not letting it control you. I'd often wonder what my aunt and Lisa thought about that night. Did they feel guilt, regret? Did they even remember? It didn't matter anymore. I no longer cared about their feelings or motivations. I realized I wasn't responsible for their actions, and carrying the burden of their guilt would only weigh me down. I had done my part. I had healed, or at least I was healing. In the midst of all this, I started connecting with people who had gone through their own forms of betrayal. Whether it was infidelity, emotional manipulation, or situations like mine, where people you trusted violated that trust in ways that felt unfathomable. It was cathartic to hear their stories, and even more so, to share my own. For so long I had felt like no one would understand. But slowly, I started to see that betrayal is a universal experience. Pain, in its many forms, connects us all. One of the things that helped me most was diving into creative outlets. I began writing again, which is something I hadn't done in years. I started telling my story, not just for myself but for others who needed to hear it. Writing became my therapy. Every word I put down on paper was a step toward reclaiming my voice, my power. What had been forced upon me no longer controlled me. I was choosing to confront it, to dissect it, and to share it on my terms. That's when I decided to start my YouTube channel. Initially, I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to take, but after seeing how therapeutic it was for me to share my story on Reddit, I knew I wanted to create a space where others could do the same. Soulmates Night was born out of this desire to give people a platform to talk about love, loss, betrayal, and the complex emotions that come with it. It became a place where people could be vulnerable, could share their pain and find comfort in knowing they weren't alone. The more stories I heard, the more I realized that betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your trust in the world. It makes you question everyone and everything. But there was something beautiful in the way people shared their experiences, the way they picked up the pieces and rebuilt themselves. There was strength in that vulnerability, in owning your story. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your opinions matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. Through the channel, I connected with so many amazing people. Some were going through fresh heartbreak, others had survived trauma much worse than mine, but they all had one thing in common: they wanted to heal. They wanted to move forward, just like I had. One message that stood out to me was from a guy named Derek. He had been through something eerily similar, betrayed by his girlfriend and best friend at Betrayal. The twist: his situation ended with him in the same position, forced into uncomfortable encounters by people he trusted. Reading his message was like looking in a mirror, and for the first time, I didn't feel so isolated in my experience. Derek wrote, "Man, I thought I was alone in this. You don't know how much your story hit home for me. I've never been able to talk about it to anyone, but after seeing your video, I realized maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to let it out." That's when I knew my channel was doing more than I ever thought it could. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about building a community of people who needed to heal together. Betrayal makes you feel alone, like you're the only one in the world going through it, but that's not true. There are so many people out there carrying scars, hiding their pain because they think no one will understand. But when we share our stories, we connect in ways that heal. As I continued to pour my energy into the channel, something incredible happened. I started to feel lighter. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long began to lift. It wasn't gone completely, I don't think it ever truly disappears, but it was more manageable. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I did with that pain, how I turned it into something that helped others. The funny thing about betrayal is that it has this paradoxical ability to both destroy and transform. In its aftermath, you're forced to confront parts of yourself you never knew existed. You see your own fragility, but also your strength. You learn what boundaries you need to set, who you can and can't trust, and most importantly, how to trust yourself again. In the years that followed, I came to terms with my past. I let go of the anger I held toward my aunt and Lisa. That doesn't mean I forgave them, or that I condoned what they did. But I stopped letting their actions take up space in my mind. They didn't deserve that power over me. They were a chapter in my life, a painful one, but not the whole story. I also found love again. After so much heartache and betrayal, I didn't think it was possible to open myself up and be saved. But it happened slowly and on my terms. I met her through the channel, actually one of those strange coincidences where the universe seems to know exactly what you need when you need it most. She had her own history of betrayal, and we bonded over our shared experiences. We took things slow, knowing we both had wounds that needed time to heal. But we built something real, something honest, and something I never thought I'd find again: trust. Looking back now, it feels surreal how much has changed. From the moment I discovered my ex's betrayal on Reddit to the night with my aunt and Lisa to where I am now, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. But I survived. And not just survived, I thrived. I turned my pain into something positive, something that helps others, and that's something no one can take away from me. To anyone out there who's been through something similar or is going through it right now, I want you to know this: it gets better. It doesn't happen overnight, and the scars will always be there, but you are stronger than you realize. Betrayal feels like the end of the world, but it's not. It's just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. You'll find your way through it, and when you do, you'll come out the other side more resilient, more aware, and more in tune with who you are. So take your time, feel your pain, but know that you won't always feel this way. One day, you'll wake up and realize that the weight on your chest has lifted. You'll realize that you're not just a victim of betrayal, you're a survivor. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your story matters, and we'd love to hear it.